January 9th, 2019.
Wow.
I'm Guy McPherson here with Doug Peacock in Tucson, Arizona. There, I did the intro. Some editing will be needed.
Very nice.
So, Guy, what this film is advocating is that the friends who are behind it foresee a large recovery zone reaching into Canada from Yellowstone, and that means, across a human landscape that's going to be both modified physically and the attendant human values have to be modified too, or they won't make it. In other words, we've got barriers to migrations in this culture, lineations, freeways along train tracks, with lines of pizza parlors and whiskey bars. And we need, overpasses and underpasses for I-90 and I-15. And this stuff has been done, especially in Canada. It works. It's no more expensive than putting in a ranch exit. That stuff our culture is capable of. We have the biology and the engineering.
Absolutely. And we've been doing it for a while, as you pointed out, especially in Canada. Mm-hmm. This is not rocket science.
No.
It's been tested. It works. It's not that big a deal.
Yeah.
Especially when you make a simple comparison with, say, the military budget for a day.
Yeah. It's a
here
drop in a...
Here we're talking about retaining habitat for an iconic species that is incredibly important, and one day's budget from the Defense Department would take care of all of these disruptions between Yellowstone and
Truly.
Canada. Possibly
Possibly one stealth bomber.
Right.
Really.
I mean, it's
cheap.
Yeah, so really it's all about priorities. That's the whole point here. What is our priority? Mm-hmm. Are we concerned at all about the natural world, with the grizzly as an iconic species in the natural world? Or are we concerned about getting another drop of oil for another day of power?
And the other element is, I sometimes make the argument that the greatest habitat need for a grizzly bear is security from human beings. Mm-hmm. And so it's human tolerance we're talking about. That's not an easy subject, but it's got to be. It's got to be acceptable to have a grizzly wandering through your back 40 somewhere on these large ranches, and and change the attitudes of the fish and game departments, who immediately take, the bears that are going to make that movement are the outlying bears, and they tend to be removed like that. They're not even given a second chance. Right. We had a sub-adult pair of orphan 3-year-olds come out of Yellowstone to Tom Minor to my place, and the Fish and Game Department, which is the Montana Department of Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, executed in their cages. They'd never even given the option of relocation to a wild landscape. They killed them in their cages. And
this is obviously insane. Mm-hmm. Along with most of the rest of the activities of the culture that we're part of. Mm-hmm. And we know so much better. We know how little effort is required, and we know that certain individuals can come to grips even without evidence. Look at Aldo Leopold when he shot that wolf in the Gila and saw the green fire dying in her eyes. And he realized that moment that we cannot shoot and we cannot kill animals simply because they're predators. And so he came to that realization. Here was a guy who was classic U.S. Forest Service material at the beginning, who was all about exploiting the landscape and more food and fiber for the growing nation, the whole thing. And then it didn't take him long, and based on his own observations and his own thinking, to realize that predators are not bad things, fire is not a bad thing, and he did this all on his own. And now here we are 100 years later, and we have abundant evidence indicating that that all of those changes he made as a result of his personal observation and his deep thinking are the kinds of changes we need to make as well. This is not hard, people. And yet you still have state agencies who shoot first and ask questions later.
You sure do. Yeah, the question I was going to ask about this whole thing is, so this recovery area or whatever it is, about 1 million people live in it, about. And the question would be, attempting to save wild creatures like grizzly bears, and amid a sea of human suffering, because it's going to come on to all of us. Is there an arrogance in that?
An arrogance in for the first time ever selecting a wild animal over 1 million human beings?
Yeah.
I'd say the arrogance goes the other way. The arrogance of humanism, that humans are the most important species in the history of the planet. That's Homo sapiens, the self-proclaimed wise ape. No, there's no arrogance in asking for people to provide a little latitude for a species that teeters on the brink and that is so iconic. It is the species, as you point out in your Pleistocene book, it is the species that precedes us. We follow along where the big bears go. And so let's, for once, provide a little latitude for this iconic organism. And I don't think there's any human flaw in letting go of a little bit of hubris and having the humility to recognize that bears are as important as a few acts throughout years by individual human beings. I don't think that's asking much. I don't think it's asking much personally to move the 1 million people. You know, that 1 million people is fewer people than live here in Tucson, Arizona.
That's right.
And in the grand scheme of things, with 340 million people in the United States, 7.7 billion in the world, a few grizzlies matter. Grizzlies are really, really important. This is a measure of our humanity, of our humility, of our willingness to recognize other species as being important. Not more important than us, of course, we would never do that as a species, but to recognize a species that it's not even as important as us. We're just giving it a little bit of ground,
yes.
A little bit of opportunity.
A little bit of grace.
Yes, a little bit of grace to perform what evolution has prescribed for it.
And my last book, but actually truly in all my books, I talk about mingled fates of men and bears, because human and bears ring so poetically, It's like man-eater. Animals that I greatly prefer. But humans in their evolution, in the evolution of the mind, if you would, that rarefied spot in our bodies that we think is so unique, it evolved in exactly the same habitats that brown bears lived. And we came out of Africa, and there were grizzlies, brown bear, all around the Mediterranean, in England and Scandinavian countries. They had moved into Asia. Homo sapiens made their move mostly about 70,000 years ago. But even before then, there were brown bears everywhere. Guy, there's one single sentence in the Federal Fish and Wildlife Service's 110-page final report that delists the grizzly, and I just want to read it to you. And well, I'd like to hear what you have to say, both as a citizen and as a scientist. The Federal Wildlife Service's conclusion, and this is in quotes, that the effects of climate change do not constitute a threat to the Yellowstone grizzly bear population now, nor are they anticipated to in the foreseeable future. That's at the very end of a 113-page delisting report.
That's absolutely insane.
That's what
How
I
could
thought.
you reach that conclusion? We're in the midst of abrupt climate change. Abrupt climate change not only has it's going on already. We're at 1 3/4 degrees above the 1750 baseline. It's the effects on
How many degrees are we?
1 3/4.
Okay.
1.73 according to research completed in April of 2018. So
That's
I think
recent.
it's safe to say we're at 1 3/4
Yeah.
above the 1750 baseline. And it's that global average temperature is already having impact on virtually every species on Earth. That's an enormous increase in the amount of heat. We're right now at the highest temperature experienced by Homo sapiens in our 315,000 year history.
Mm-hmm.
To claim that global warming is not already impacting large mammals is ridiculous. There's a study came out years ago indicating that very slow projected rates of change up until 2100 using the standard IPCC approach would outstrip the ability of vertebrates to keep up by a factor of 10,000 times. And then a more recent paper just out in 2018 indicates that habitat for mammals in general is being outstripped by the slow rates of climate change. We're somewhere in the early to medium part of runaway exponential climate change. It's underway, it's unstoppable. For years I thought we could stop it by collapsing industrial civilization. But now we know about global dimming. Now we know about the world's 450 and change nuclear power plants that are going to melt down catastrophically in the wake of an abrupt collapse of industrial civilization. Both of those, global dimming and runaway
And global
nuclear,
dimming will just be the natural result of the collapse of industrial civilization.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Global dimming is accounting for an enormous amount of cooling effect. At the same time we put greenhouse gases into the atmosphere
I
to warm the
understand the
planet.
phenomena.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
So approximately 6 weeks after we stop putting those sulfates into the atmosphere, they all fall out. And then we lose global dimming. And then we're really in runaway so fast that it's difficult for me to imagine any large vertebrate mammal like us, like grizzlies, like any brown bear anywhere, keeping up with that. Our habitat is already being outstripped, and when I say our, I mean large vertebrate mammals. Not just humans, not just grizz. Every large vertebrate mammal is endangered right now. To claim otherwise is to ignore the evidence or to come right out with a bald-faced lie. Those are the two options I see the Fish and Wildlife Service pursuing. It's got to be one of those two.
Mm-hmm.
They have to know. I know. You know.
Yeah.
These are federal paid scientists who are paid to know this information. How could they not know?
It seems to be an institutional flaw of the Federal Wildlife Service to deny climate change, because we have wolverines up here. Wolverines, there's only 200 or 300 left south of Canada, and they do 100% of their reproduction in what is called persistent spring snow, which means, the end of April kind of. There's got to be enough snow for them, to den, raise their pups, and yet we were denied listing the wolverine as a threatened species, merely as a threatened species, because of their refusal to consider climate change.
Well, we're seeing a shift of seasons already.
Yeah.
The USDA moved their zones for plant and garden temperatures. That must be probably 8 years ago now. So the USDA recognizes it. Now, I recognize that the Fish and Wildlife Service is in the Department of Interior, not in the Department of Agriculture. Maybe there's some sort of blinders in the Department of Interior.
I believe it's a foul abscess, and it is nowhere as visible as within the so-called interagency grizzly bear coordinating committee. You know, which is a bunch of interagency people, forest and Indian tribes, and you know, the Fish and Game Departments of 3 states get together. But they have had this on their agenda since the 90s as a success story to recover, you know, and the state, you know, and they've done it twice. They did it 10 years ago. I helped lead that one too. And we won it in federal court, a brilliant argument by Doug Honnold. And 10 years later, they're doing the same damn thing again. And subsequent to their writing this consideration and yet rejection of climate change, let alone abrupt climate change, Yellowstone, you know, Yellowstone has a little publication, scientific publication. The last one was about climate change. And, you know, they found, for one thing, the sweep of forest fires is gradually turning lodgepole into grassland, you know. And they've also measured temperatures of waters, and the streams and lakes are warming. And, you know, so there's that kind of data, and yet this one rogue agency, and that's what I consider because they don't care about wildlife, and they're not very scientific, denies to consider any mention of climate change.
That's insane, and I have to wonder why? What's the motive behind denying what is already right in our faces?
Yeah, the speculation is it's human ego, and this insularity, and this all-male, patriarchal, insular committee. I mean, it's, you know, it's the same blights that are upon our whole culture, the patriarchy.
That's so sad.
A grizzly bear biologist, now working in Canada, but he started out in Yellowstone, and back in 1976 on his first grizzly bear outing, he ran into a sow grizzly. Whatever he did wasn't the right thing. He had half his face bitten off. He's still missing an eye, and you know. And I hang out with this guy, and
he probably has respect for grizzlies.
He loves grizzlies.
Unlike the people who are writing this report.
And we hang out in British Columbia, and we walk down the streets of this Indian village, and all the people kind of go like this. And my friend Barry thinks it's because he has a PhD.
Oh, there's that human ego again, isn't it?
No, I don't think so, Barry. It's rather distinctive guy with an eye patch, you know, his cheek missing.
All he's missing is a parrot on his shoulder.
Yeah. Anyway, he's a wonderful, wonderful man. He's fought all his life to study and protect grizzlies. He worked at not at Katmai, but at you know, Brooks, up in Alaska.
The Brooks Range.
Yeah. Well, the Brooks, it's a drainage there where there's a lot of bear view. And he sent a question for you. He says, are the climate predictions accurate enough to plan the introduction of native plants, like he has in mind berries and such, ahead of, you know, to kind of seed the way north?
Sure, to the extent that we are capable of doing that, and I don't know that will work. In fact, I suspect it won't. But I think we should act as if it will. I think we should act as if we can create food and other elements of habitat for species that are going to be required to move. I think that we have to do that. That's our moral obligation. We have destroyed the habitat for these organisms where they live. So the least we could do is try to prepare habitat for them where they are going to be forced to move into the future.
Yeah.
It might not work. It would surprise me, actually, if it worked. But
It's
so
worth a
what?
try.
We've done
What are we gonna
crazier
do?
things
Yeah,
as a species. Come on.
yeah.
We've spent an enormous amount of money doing absolutely insane things. This is actually a sane thing that wouldn't cost very much money. Why not?
Let me see. My other biologist friend, he is one of 2 or 3 people most responsible for studying the white bark pine collapse in Yellowstone Park. And of course, the most important single food in Yellowstone Park has been the seed, the nut of the white bark pine. And from 2002, winter temperatures raised enough so that the pine beetle could overwinter. You know, it takes
Right.
maybe 3 days of 35 below zero to kill off the larva. Well, they moved up the life zone. And I don't know if the figures are 85 or 95% of I think it's 95, the loss of mature cone-bearing white bark trees. You know, this is a tree that it takes 80 years to put out cones. And,
Right.
and it's a high altitude pine, it's a stone pine. To find another brown bear ecosystem like Yellowstone, you have to go to Siberia. It's really unique, and it's gone. And my friend Jesse Logan headed up those studies, and it was wonderful kind of hanging out with him during this time. This is the guy that's also the avid fisherman.
Right.
And he wanted me to ask you if the waters are going to, you know, in the Northern Rockies are going to get hot enough so that trout can't survive.
Right. So that he can't go trout
So they
fishing
can't
anymore.
go fishing. Yeah.
Yeah, of course they are.
I mean, he signs all his letters with, if fishing interferes with your job, quit your job.
Yeah, well, you know, it's already happening. It's already happening. And can we project forward with certainty that what is happening now is going to be exacerbated into the future? Of course we can. If only for one simple reason, that the maximum heating associated with carbon dioxide lags behind the release of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere by about 10 years. So we know that 10 years from now is going to be hotter than today, based on carbon dioxide alone. Never mind the methane that is exploding out of the Arctic Ocean and out of the permafrost. Never mind the virtually immediate self-reinforcing feedback loop that is the water vapor in the upper troposphere. You know, you start stacking these things together and it looks like a really dire future. It does not look like a continued relatively slow rate of change like we have seen since 1750 or even 1850 or even 1900. It looks like we're going to achieve much higher temperatures on Earth, global average temperature, in a very short period of time than we've ever seen before. And so, of course, that's going to interrupt habitat for trout. And of course, that's going to interrupt habitat for grizzly. And of course, it's going to interfere with habitat for the jays and the white bark pine. How could it not?
Yeah, of course. And snow, same.
Yes, the winters are getting shorter, and
Yeah.
they're getting shorter on both ends. The length of the seasons in the summer and the autumn is being extended, and the spring is more moving forward into the winter. So we're going to see the collapse of that wolverine habitat, that one little piece you mentioned that is absolutely required. It's required, but it's not necessary to maintain wolverine habitat. You got to have that one little piece, and you got to have a bunch of other pieces as well. You remove any one of those pieces along the way, wolverines are gone, period. It's not that they're gone that week, but once they lose that habitat, they're functionally extinct. And then what are you going to do? Put them in a zoo? You know, we did that with the passenger pigeon, we did that with the Carolina parakeet, we did it with a bunch of different species. But ultimately, they all went the same way. They don't have a habitat out here, habitat in the Northern Rockies, habitat in Siberia. If they don't have habitat, they're functionally extinct, which means they're living on borrowed time.
Can I ask you a question about methane?
Yeah, of course.
because I have a Round River project that's working with the Inuit on the Beaufort Sea, and I get all of these reports and pictures, and methane is literally boiling out
Right.
of the permafrost and the ocean bottom.
Right, and also out of fresh water now.
Yeah.
Fresh water in the north, all over the north.
Okay, I ran at the airport. I ran into some kind of an acquaintance. I didn't remember his name, but he works for the government on climate change. And I said, I got all these pictures. The methane is boiling out of the Arctic. It's not just a continental shelf. It's a everything is. And he says, we can't find it. So I asked this government sucker, whose job it is to look for bad things in the air.
Right.
We can't find it.
Well, if you aren't looking, you're not going to find anything. If you put blinders on, you're not going to see.
The science of the system that gives us what it finds, not what's out there.
My friend Dar Jamail, who's an actual, honest, legitimate journalist, has been focusing on what he calls anthropogenic climate disruption, or climate change, since he moved back to the United States upon hearing about my work in 2013 or 2014. And he has a book coming out within the next month or so, and he spent a lot of time trying to track down government scientists from the United States federal government to talk about methane. He encountered the same sort of response. We're not going to talk about that. That's off the, we can't, it's obvious that they could know if they wanted to know, but they don't want to know, so they don't take the measurements. It's like when Fukushima went, and a year or two later, the United States federal government shut down all the ionizing radiation detection units in the western United States.
Truly.
Well, of course ionizing radiation is reaching the west coast of the United States from Fukushima.
I mean,
but if you don't measure it, it's not there.
Of
course, right. If you don't measure it, it's not there. It's really 1984.
Okay. This is from Chuck Irestone, who's the director of Save the Yellowstone Grizzly. He does websites and a day-by-day work. He wonders if it's really kind of a dumb question.
I've had worse, I can assure you.
How the habitat will change, and where might the grizzlies migrate?
Okay. It's not that crazy of a question. I've heard crazier things, mostly from a human perspective. People want to know where's the last place a human being will be, so that they can move there.
Go to Boise, Idaho, I read in the New York Times. And join the Mormon church.
My parents and my sister will be happy to know that.
And then stick your head up your own ass until you snuff out.
Yeah.
Oh, I guess we got to cut that.
Yeah, where's the last place there's going to be a grizz? Just as with when somebody asked me their own expiration date, I don't know. I don't know. Of course we're outstripping the habitat. Of course we're destroying habitat as quickly as we possibly can.
The up on the Arctic again, where I've got observers, the polar bear are racing inland. They're eating caribou calves and fledgling snow geese, when they can't fly. And they're joining grizzly bears. And I assume they're eating, sedges and grasses, because that's what bears live on up there. And there's a berry crop. And they're interbreeding, and of course their offspring is reproductive,
Right.
But really the polar bears, it seemed to be, their graceful way of exiting is to fold their recessive gene back into the brown bear from whence it came, maybe a couple 100,000 years ago. It's done this a couple times at least, It was the nature of that habitat. Do you have any guesses as what's going to happen to the vast tundra up there that's being trashed by the gas and oil industry as we speak?
I'm the wrong person to ask that question.
Okay.
And this was a primary subject of Dar Jamail's book, so he might have some information about it.
I can't wait
the
for
next
it to come
month or
out.
two. But as you've already indicated, the government scientists seem to be unwilling to accept the full facts. And so if somebody knows, it's almost certainly a government employee, and that means we'll never know.
Yeah, truly.
because the information is not being released.
Okay, Chuck has another question. He said, according to The Guardian again, I don't know if I brought this up or not, the single best thing we can do for the planet is eat no meat or dairy.
Right, and George Monbiot just had a piece about this, about going vegan as a response to too much carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And whereas it is true that about 30% of methane is produced by industrial agriculture, and a significant amount of carbon dioxide is produced by
and just
industrial
the
agriculture
land
as
mass
well.
that it takes
Sure,
up.
absolutely. It's too late. I don't know how many ways
I couldn't agree
to tell
more.
people that it's too late to change our diets. And furthermore, how are you going to convince 7.7 billion people to change their diets? How are you going to convince 7.7 billion people to not have children, to change their diet radically?
And
change
quit
their
eating
diets?
your carne asada, Doug.
To me, this is just another example of large institutions, including the media, including a significant body of scientists, who are shaming and blaming people into changing their action. Well, that doesn't work. We know that that doesn't work. Shaming and blaming people will not cause them to change their behavior. It works on a 5-year-old. We're not 5-year-olds. Treat us like adults. And furthermore, there's abundant evidence now indicating that going vegan, even if we all went back 70 years and went vegan then, it's still not going to save anything, certainly not including us. It's too late. It wouldn't work then. It won't work now. It's classic blame and shame activity. Let's grow up. That's my response. Let's grow up. Let's take some responsibility for ourselves as individual human beings. And that's what we have, Doug. That's what you've been doing your whole life, is taking responsibility for you. That was Abbey's whole approach. And his master's thesis on anarchism was all about taking personal responsibility, not letting us be treated by the nanny state like we're children. We have been so goddamned infantilized as an entire culture that I don't think I think that all people can do is look to a major media outlet and ask, what should I do? What should I do? It's ridiculous. We have become completely infantilized, and now we don't even know what we should eat. So we turn to The Guardian for advice about which light bulbs we should use and how much. Come on.
Boiled cabbage, lots of it. Chuck has one final question, and he's sort of paraphrasing something I used to say somewhat glibly, but not entirely. He said, if we can save the grizzly, can we save ourselves?
I think that's a huge if.
Yeah, I don't think...
again.
I think we're walking the same path. And I can make an extensive paleontological argument about it, but we're as close as in our embryonic habitat, that from which we evolved not farms, not cities, but before that, it's the same. It's the same everywhere.
Right. Can I ask you a question or two?
Yeah.
It's pretty clear, despite your occasional side comment otherwise, that you're not a complete misanthrope. I know that you have great respect and love for non-human animals, and that's rare.
Yeah,
but that doesn't make you a misanthrope.
Fair. No.
And you have children, and you have a new grandchild, and that alone ensures your love for at least some part of humanity. So how do you walk this walk? How do you walk that balancing act?
I'm going to fight it out to the end of my times, and I don't think it really matters if I'm trying to save habitat for grizzlies or my own children. I think it's roughly the same battle. And what else can we do? I'm going to rage and fight to the end of my days. I know that. And the grizzly bear was something I stumbled into 50 years ago, and they never left.
Right.
So That's they're in my backyard.
Well, you went into their backyard first, to be fair.
Yeah, I've lived there ever since.
I know, I understand.
I just have to have a bear in the backyard.
And what does that look like? I'm gonna.
It's a grim losing fight mainly.
Okay, but you're fighting this. You're fighting this fight on several fronts.
Yeah.
You're taking the legal approach. You're taking the monkey wrenching approach, shall I say?
Sure.
You're taking the societal approach. Maybe you can describe all of that in a nutshell, or maybe give a sentence for each one of those.
It is the urgency of abrupt climate change that just pushed me to the edge where I used to tell people to go dig up one of those deer rifles that Ed buried. Now I tell them to go vote. You know, and you know, I file amicus briefs in federal court and stuff like that. That's really not my preferred way of doing business. But I consider run. You know, the purpose of saving grizzly involves changing human attitudes, and that's all kinds of educational stuff I wouldn't have mentioned five years ago. So I can blame you for a lot of this trouble.
I get blamed for a lot more than that. Trust me.
You know, I wouldn't have had. I've had to sort of, you know, broaden my societal approach to this very large problem, which touches everything. You know.
Right.
I mean, I could pick something else, but this is as good as anything.
Right. Absolutely. And how do you deal every day to day, with your children who are not living in your house? They're grown. They're in their 30s. How do you walk that line with trying to be their friend and their father and their mentor, and also ensuring, I think, that they don't get thrown in jail?
Yeah. Well, they have chosen me as a mentor without adapting all of my bad, worse, very bad, not good habits, okay? And so they figured that one out on their own. And, you know, the best thing I can do for them is just show them I love them by pretty much doing what I'm doing.
Right.
And it's taken a toll on my health. You know, the stress level, you know, I wish I could say I'm not susceptible to it, but apparently I am. It's taking a drain. And I got too many goddamn things to, you know, do with it. But
Right.
I don't get paid for any of them. You know how that works.
Yes, I do. Yeah.
Well,
A stressful life for no pay is quite a deal.
yeah.
I wouldn't recommend it to anybody except you and me.
Yeah, right. It works. You know. I wish I had a six-pack of beer under that tomorrow, but, you know, life is pretty good.
Yeah. Well, let's go track that down now.
Okay.